Hi, I'm Max Keiser. This is the Keiser Report. I know you want to see Max and Stacy in bed. We're going to accommodate you with a show coming up soon, probably in December. We'll be in bed. Not only that, but you're not helping me by not following me on Twitter and by following Stacy Herbert instead. Now she's catching up to me on Twitter in the number of followers, and that's not right, is it? It's called the Keiser Report. All right, Stacy Herbert, what do you got for me?
Max, make love, not debt. That's the Giabo art sent in this week. As you see, apparently John Lennon and Yoko Ono were actually watching the Keiser Report during their famous bed-in 1969. And you see, this is a unique perspective. Not very many people look at this shot from that time. But as you can see, they were also saying, all we are saying is let the banks fail and Keiser karma.
At the time, nobody thought to look at the full 360 of that shot.
Exactly.
To look at some of the posters on the wall, like make love, not debt. Now, suddenly, in the year 2011, John and Yoko were clairvoyant. They saw, John was a visionary. He saw the future. He knew what was coming.
Well, let's move on to the first headline here, Max. The New World Order. Fiscal austerity, sectors in the line of fire. This is a report from Societe Generale, and they say, we are all Greeks now. Max, as we're all Greeks, we must say that in Greek.
Είμαστε όλοι Έλληνες τώρα. Είμαστε όλοι Έλληνες τώρα.
And I always thought that what I was saying was, I need another cup of coffee. I thought that's what I was saying.
I didn't know you sounded like a lady. Anyway, SocGen says that no one can claim to be immune from a Greek-style spiral. Why? Because our economies are mature and we are aging. So public expenditure, they say, will hit 45% of GDP by 2015. But, Max, I don't think it's just because we're aging. I think it's because we have too much crime, too much banking crime, too much debt.
Yeah, well, this is the underlying kind of realization that is slowly coming into the consciousness of those who are being victimized by banking crime. Remember 10 years ago, it was the anti-globalization movement, and then they figured out, you know what? Let's get more specific here. It's actually Wall Street. It's actually the banks we need to attack. And then the next step would be to name individual bankers and then to get the pitchfork.
But SocGen should talk because, of course, they wouldn't be in existence if Greece actually went under, because bailing out Greece was largely bailing out Societe Generale and Bank Paribas.
Well, this is an interesting comment on how modern banks work. You have the research department, then you have the M&A department, mergers and acquisitions, then you have management, then you have the proprietary trading desk. And these parts of this company, this bank, should all be regulated in some way so that they don't abuse their positions to make money at the cost of the overall integrity of the system and what's now known as the bottom 99%. So the fact that a research department is Societe Generale, first of all, Societe Generale is technically insolvent. They have not enough working capital to meet their monthly expenses. It's all coming from outside forces and through the shadow banking system. Same thing with BNP. It's technically an insolvent bank. It doesn't stop the research department from putting out reams and reams and reams of research, some of which is good, some of it's bad, but all of it is inconsequential taken in the context of global bank meltdown, global fiat currency meltdown, and the rise of gold and silver.
Well, that shadow banking system bailing out SocGen, that shadow looks a whole lot like the U.S. Federal Reserve, I have to say.
Well, the U.S. Federal Reserve's balance sheet is now several $trillion in size and growing rapidly. And what they're trying to do now with the EFSF, which is the European version of what happened in America in 2008, they want to take essentially the Bundesbank, the German banks, and they want to expand their shadow banking system. And according to the president of the EU, they want to expand it up to 5 trillion euros right away and probably take it up to 20 trillion euros in the next 6 months.
But Max, we are all Greeks now, or?
Είμαστε όλοι Έλληνες τώρα.
Greeks set to scream bloody murder as pension fund threatens to recoup 8 billion euros in illegally paid out proceeds. This is another thing you're going to see going forward, and this is something we've talked about a few years ago that we predicted this, is they're going to come up with all sorts of, we illegally paid this to you, and you illegally accepted this pension money, and therefore you owe it to us.
Check out the asymmetry here. They're abrogating a contract, a pension contract, and they're confiscating billions of euros. At the same time, out of this side of the mouth, they're saying that, well, we have to honor our debts to sovereign creditors. We couldn't possibly abrogate a contract. That's anti-civilization. So they speak out of both sides of the mouth, and always to the benefit of the top 1%, always to the detriment of the bottom 99%. The Greek people are on the street. Of course, they're fighting back. They understand it's the banks now. They understand that Papandreou's in the pocket of the banks, that he's a terrorist, as in terrorism, as in Patriot Act-style terrorism, and he needs to go.
So Zero Hedge says, very soon Greeks will discover that not only are their pension funds about 50% underfunded, courtesy of the first of many European bailouts, but that they will actually have to repay pension proceeds back. That's 8 billion euros again, and it's according to the Social Security Foundation, the IKA Robertos Spiropoulos.
The pensions are not underfunded. The Greek banks are overfunded. Okay, Papandreou needs to be showered in a mountain of moussaka. He needs to be buried alive in moussaka.
That might make him more appealing than he normally is.
Well, it's definitely tastier.
Well, the other thing I thought of this, of course, is that you're going to have your savings disappear, for example. And they'll say, we illegally paid you your pension, or you illegally collected your pension. And it'll be up to you to go up against the behemoth of the state to prove that actually you were owed this pension that they said you collected illegally. And that reminds me, in America, all of these foreclosures that happened over the past few years, where there was no paperwork, no titles, all sorts of illegal activity for which the banks have paid nothing but some small fines. Here's a headline, Max: disgusting. Fraud closure firm mocks their victims at Halloween party. So this was on Friday of last week, and it was the law firm of Stephen J. Baum, who are known as a foreclosure mill. And they represent mortgage lenders, including Citigroup, JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, and Wells Fargo. And as you can see from these photos, this is their theme of the homelessness, of the people homeless due to their foreclosures. So in this one image, you see these two women who have the sign, "I lost my home and I was never served." So specifically mocking the fact that their crimes of these banks and these foreclosure firms, that they're the ones that committed the crime, and they're laughing at the people that they've thrown out into the street.
Right, we're all Greek now. I think we're all on the train to Treblinka now, basically, if these Wall Street banks have their way. You know, what's going to happen in Europe is probably another Kristallnacht. You know, this is the night when game on, you know, when basically it was just, we'll take it all. You're going to the ghetto. You're going to the concentration camp. That's what the banks in France and Germany are angling for now.
And let's turn to this other image here from that same Halloween party. There's one sign that says OTSC. It stands for Order to Show Cause, which is a last-ditch motion that often made by desperate homeowners about to be evicted from their homes. And another sign saying bleep foreclosure, I'm current. So again, taunting these people, taunting the people that they've illegally foreclosed on and forced out of their homes based on mortgages from JP Morgan, Citigroup, and Wells Fargo that were illegally induced, that were fraudulently induced mortgages.
Well, these mortgage bankers and bankers are demonstrating classic signs of the serial killers, who they want to be caught. You know, they're sick, and they leave these clues because they realize that society needs to do away with them.
Well, I think you're right there, Max, on the serial killer front, because that is perhaps something you're seeing because of the lack of justice. The fact that the Obama administration and their Department of Justice refuse to prosecute these crimes. These people become very hubristic. They think that they are better than everybody else and they can mock them. And then also there are some who genuinely feel guilty and want to be caught. So they're leaving all sorts of clues to their crime. I mean, those women in that photo, they're openly admitting to their crime, but they sent a family out into the street.
Right, and Bill Black, who put 1,500 of these guys in jail during the 80s, he's like very specific about saying Eric Holder, the U.S. Attorney General, is also on the hook for this type of negligence.
Just to highlight, Max, how disgusting this event was, I want to turn to New York City homeless facts. The homeless population of New York City rose to an all-time high in 2011. A reported 113,552 slept in the city's emergency shelters last year, including over 40,000 children. So 40,000 children, these two women are mocking.
They'll be talking about the final solution soon.
But I think the better neighborhood to live in is Max Keiser's neighborhood. This is some more Giabo art. Apparently somebody's making a film version of this show. But let's turn to the European neighborhood. Jim Rogers says new Greece deal can't save Europe. So going back to Greece, we're all Greek now. Jim Rogers was very surprised and happy that there's a 50% haircut on Greek debt. But he says it needs to be more because they're bankrupt. It needs to be 100%. So unless that happens, Europe is doomed.
Well, it was a 50% Greek debt haircut, but a 500% increase in recapitalization of fraudulent loans from the banks. So the banks made money, and the total indebtedness went up, not down. Total propaganda.
Well, Jim Rogers concurs there because he says most European countries are increasing their debt rather than decreasing their debt. Until that changes, the problems are going to continue just as they will in the United States.
Jim agrees with me, of course, as always.
Yeah, I see he wears a bow tie like you do occasionally as well.
I got him into gold. I'm the one who got Jim Rogers into gold.
Yeah, right. Anyway, final neighborhood story here. Iceland passes final hurdle in $11.4 billion payout. So apparently their high court in Iceland has accepted the emergency law, which essentially allows Iceland to shaft the bondholders, which include Royal Bank of Scotland, BNP Paribas, and Deutsche Bank, and make whole the depositors.
You know what? I think we're going to get into this in the second half, aren't we?
I think so. I think you're talking to Birgitta Jonsdottir.
Oh, good. So we're going to explore this more deeply. Stacy Herbert, thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you, Max.
Don't go away. Much more coming your way, including Birgitta Jonsdottir talking about this very Icelandic screw-up. Hi, welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to go to Iceland and speak with Birgitta Jonsdottir. She's a member of Parliament in Iceland. Birgitta, welcome back to the Keiser Report.
Well, thank you very much. I'm happy to be back.
All right, Birgitta. Last week, the Icelandic government and the IMF co-hosted a conference, Iceland's Recovery, Lessons and Challenges. Before we discuss the conference, give the audience a brief outline of the collapse in Iceland.
Oh, wow. So in 2008, we had the third largest financial meltdown in the history of humankind. Prior to that, we were the most developed nation according to the UN in 2007. 2008, we were put under terrorist act, or one of our banks with the Icelandic name associated to it, on the anti-terrorist list alongside with North Korea, Zimbabwe.
Okay, let me stop you right there. So in other words, some global authorities recognized that the Icelandic bankers were terrorists, and they put them on the terrorist watch list, or they've been hunting them down as terrorists?
Oh, no. They are still investing, unfortunately. One of them is still on the list of the richest people in the world. Unfortunately, none of the people responsible for the Ponzi scheme in relation to the banks has been persecuted. To my understanding, though, it is very difficult to get these people charged because many of them, the people that run the banks, they co-write the laws. So they know which loopholes to use and which gray zones to skate on. So I'm not sure if the people responsible from robbing the banks from inside will ever be held accountable. And this is, of course, not only a problem in Iceland, but all over the world.
It's hard to believe because they were able to get Gaddafi, Saddam Hussein. What was the name of the primary terrorist in Iceland that people are trying to find and prosecute and hopefully hang? What's his name again?
Björgúlfur Thor Björgúlfsson. He is actually one of the prime investors in a new data center in Iceland called Wern Holding. And he was responsible for ISAFE. But there are some good news in relation to that. Just 3 days ago, there was a court ruling finally in relation to if the emergency laws that we put through in order to deal with the financial collapse will hold or not. They will hold, and that means that the British and the Dutch governments will get all their money back without the Icelandic taxpayers put on, because there is an ESA court ruling imminent, or a court case if we breach the EEA law.
Yeah, that's right. David Cameron and the government in Netherlands, they are being held hostage by banking terrorists in their countries, and they need the Icelandic people to help them fund the extortion money. Now, when Iceland is dealing with the IMF, how much debt did Iceland take from the IMF, and what did the IMF demand in exchange for their loans?
Well, this is all a very interesting story, actually. According to the finance minister and the central bank manager in Iceland, we have not used any of the loan from the IMF, but we still haven't given it back to them, even if we are supposed to be finished in the program. The interesting thing is the IMF has now decided to use Iceland as a promotional kit for them being the new cuddly and soft IMF. I had to remind the people from the IMF at the conference in Iceland last week about their policy in Greece and their policy and program in Lithuania, where they indeed have not changed anything from the previous disasters in Asia. But they're still trying to market the IMF as if it has changed. And I think it's dangerous. Many economists and so forth look at the Icelandic example as a proof that the IMF has changed. Now, hear my warning, they have not. And even if they have not gone as harshly in Iceland, there is, for example, one story that was not discussed at this conference at all, and that is that one of our energy companies was sold to a foreign company, like one of these drawer companies. They created a drawer company in Sweden in order to buy it, and they were a front for the Pan American Silver Corporation from Canada. And they managed to get a resource that should indeed remain in the ownership of the nation.
Okay, let me cut you in there for a second. So in other words, Iceland did not use the IMF loans, but the IMF is still going forward with asset sales of Icelandic-owned properties anyway, and they're using Iceland as the poster child for their activities in Greece. I don't understand. I mean, they have the perfect poster child in Dominic Strauss-Kahn. He's got to be the financial rapist of the century. How come they don't push him? Has Christine Lagarde been to your country yet to let you know the good news that the IMF is there to help you?
No, we haven't seen Christine in Iceland yet, but we had an IMF deputy managing director speaking at this conference in a panel. She said that the IMF had, indeed in Iceland, helped strengthening the welfare system. which is, of course, ludicrous lie. We already had rather weak both healthcare and educational system here prior to the IMF because of 18 years of the Independence Party. But we're having exodus out of Iceland. We don't even have properly staffed hospitals, and all the hospitals now they've been slashed so badly that we've been getting letters from all of them, the parliamentarians in Iceland, just basically saying that they can't cut anymore unless we will have health hazards. And the same applies to the educational system. And of course, usually the people that can't defend themselves have the most difficult time in that sort of austerity measures. So even if we have women at the top of the IMF, I don't think it has changed yet. And I don't think it will ever change because we all know what the function of the IMF is. And that is not to look after the people, but to look after the people that have the power. So they're looking after the 1%, not the 99%.
All right, now, Iceland did stiff the bondholders on the collapsed banks in Iceland, something that you're not seeing in Ireland or Greece, where the bondholders are being made whole. So that piece of the equation, in Iceland anyway, seems to have gone in favor of the population. What are your thoughts on this aspect of the whole catastrophe?
Well, I think there are some things that can be learned from Iceland, but we have to bear in mind that Iceland is, of course, a little bit special. It was not because the Icelandic government was so smart that they decided to let the banks fail. They just couldn't get the money to save them. And then, everybody thought that was really bad, but that actually has turned out to be a great blessing for us, that all the three banks were actually allowed to fail. But one of the differences between Iceland and many other countries is that many of the people that had money in the banks or shares or, owned some of this toxic material inside them were not Icelanders, but they were mostly foreign-owned. So they collapsed on foreign stakeholders. That would not be the case, for example, if a bank would collapse in France. So that was a blessing in disguise that we had been used as a hedge fund for foreign traders. But some countries might actually want to consider to let the banks fail. I think in general, what people are calling for now all over the world is that the banks will become small enough and that they will be separated and held more accountable, and that we should indeed just have sort of community-based banks for the people in the communities, and then the people that want to run wild with their bubbles can do that in peace, maybe in the City of London.
Well, any economy anywhere thrives on competition. And if you have too big to fail banks, that means you don't have competition. And the IMF is saying that, wait a minute, we don't want competition in Iceland's banking system. We want to put it together with our global bailout funds to continue the too big to fail motif that has destroyed these economies but made our staff extraordinarily wealthy and everyone associated with our staff. So yes, competition needs to have actual multiple entrants into a market competing with each other. But let's get back to the conference that you were recently attending, because we were reading your tweets from the conference, and you tweeted that Citigroup, their chief economist, William Boter, said that there should be a jubilee, a debt jubilee, every 50 years. Your thoughts on how that was received?
That was a surprise to many of us. He said there should be debt jubilee every 50 years, and we had reached year 49 or 50. So he was basically saying that we should have debt jubilee in Iceland. Maybe that time has come everywhere. Maybe it's time that we start anew. And I think that what I've been hearing everywhere is that people don't trust in the system, any aspect of the system, because the system is self-serving. It doesn't matter if it's the financial system or other systems. So, yeah, why don't we take this good man's advice and have debt jubileum everywhere?
Well, the gold and silver vigilantes are going to force the issue one way or another. The governments can put off the inevitable as long as they want. It's not stopping gold and silver from continuing to go higher. Well, finally, Birgitta, a question from Facebook.com/Keiser Report from Jesse Kersey, who asks, does Birgitta believe that the Greek and or Portuguese lawmakers have the cojones to take back their sovereignty, or is it too late for them? And let me just also add here, from what you're saying here today, the IMF is so intricately involved in the Icelandic banking situation today that it's not clear that Iceland really has avoided loss of sovereignty yet, is it, Birgitta?
Yeah, indeed. It's not clear. And obviously the banks were rebuilt just as they were. And there is so much bank secrecy that even the finance minister doesn't have access to who owns the banks that have been resurrected out of the old banks.
So there's still no transparency in the Icelandic banking system, even though you were unmercifully financially raped by HSBC, Barclays, Lloyds of London, Lehman, Bear, Goldman, JP Morgan. You were gangbanged unmercifully. There's still no transparency in Iceland.
Incredible, isn't it? We've been fighting for it, me and a few other people in the parliament, but we are just speaking to deaf ears. And I think that we have to bear in mind that most politicians or, people in power are puppets. They are puppets for the financial sector. And we just have to face it. And it is really time that we look beyond the traditional politics because, let's face it, our democracies, they are dictatorship with many heads because we, the people, we do not have access to decision making or to make sure that they are doing their jobs in favor of our needs and the needs of the great many, but only the few.
All right, Birgitta Jonsdottir, that's all the time we have for. Thanks for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you so much.
And that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. I want to thank my guest, Birgitta Jonsdottir. You can follow her on Twitter at BirgittaJ. You can follow us on Facebook.com/Keiser Report or at Twitter/Keiser Report. You can also send us an email at keiserreport@rttv.ru. And follow me on Twitter instead of Stacy Herbert. I'm Max Keiser/Twitter. No, it's Twitter. You'll figure it out. It's me, though, not her. Until next time, this is Max Keiser saying bye, y'all.